The night air in Rome carried a gentle warmth as stars twinkled above the ancient city. Keanu Reeves adjusted his simple black tie, feeling slightly out of place among the glittering crowd at the International Children's Future Gala. He had never been one for fancy parties, but the cause was close to his heart, raising money for education in underserved communities worldwide. Keanu sipped his sparkling water, quietly observing the room from a corner. Unlike many celebrities who commanded attention wherever they went, he preferred to blend in to watch and listen. The marble floors of the historic villa reflected the soft chandelier light as waiters weaved through clusters of well-dressed guests. "Mr. Reeves, I hope I'm not disturbing you." Keanu turned to find an older gentleman with kind eyes and a warm smile. He wore a simple black suit with a small pin on his lapel, the Vatican insignia. "Not at all," Keanu said, extending his hand. "Please call me Keanu." "Cardinal Antonio Vasquez," the man introduced himself. "I must confess I'm a fan of your work, particularly those films about kindness and redemption." Keanu smiled. The Cardinal didn't mention the action movies most people recognized him from, but instead referenced his lesser-known roles. There was something genuine about this man that put Keanu at ease. "Thank you. Those stories mean a lot to me, too." They were soon joined by two other Vatican officials, a younger priest named Father Thomas, who spoke with an Irish lilt, and Sister Elena, who ran educational programs throughout South America. The conversation flowed naturally, touching on art, culture, and eventually the charity work that had brought them all to the gala. Keanu mentioned his recent visits to several countries, supporting clean water initiatives and school-building projects away from the spotlight of cameras and reporters. "Last month I was in a small village in Colombia," Keanu said, his voice growing softer as he recalled the memory. "Amazing people there, rebuilding after years of hardship." Sister Elena's eyes brightened. "Colombia? Whereabouts?" "A place called San Miguel del Rio. Tiny spot, not even on most maps. Beautiful, though, nestled between mountains with this little river running through it." The three Vatican representatives exchanged quick glances. "That's quite a coincidence," Cardinal Vasquez said carefully. "We have connections there as well." Something in their reaction made Keanu pause. He took another sip of his water, thinking back to the village, the clinic he had visited, and the older man working there who had seemed strangely familiar. "Actually, something pretty remarkable happened there," Keanu said, lowering his voice. "There was this doctor, or I thought he was a doctor, helping at the local clinic. Older gentleman, spoke perfect Spanish but with an accent. Something about him seemed so familiar, but I couldn't place it." Father Thomas's hand tightened slightly around his glass. Sister Elena's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He was working tirelessly, treating children, comforting mothers, even helping repair the roof between patients. No special treatment, no fancy equipment, just pure dedication. Keanu paused, remembering the scene. It wasn't until the third day, when he was sitting with this young boy who'd been badly injured, just talking to him, making him laugh despite the pain, that I realized why he looked familiar. The three Vatican representatives stood perfectly still now, their expressions a mixture of concern and curiosity. "It was Pope Francis," Keanu said simply. "No fancy robes, no security detail. Just a man in worn clothes with a medical bag serving people who needed help." The silence that followed was heavy. Across the room, laughter and conversation continued, but in their small circle, time seemed suspended. Cardinal Vasquez cleared his throat. "Mr. Reeves, Keanu, that's quite a story." "I know how it sounds," Keanu said. "I wouldn't have believed it either. But it was him. When our eyes met, he knew that I recognized him. He didn't say anything about it, just gave me this little nod and went back to bandaging the boy's arm." Sister Elena exchanged a meaningful look with her colleagues. "Did you speak with him?" "Briefly, later that evening. He found me as I was helping distribute supplies. We walked by the river away from everyone else." Keanu's eyes grew distant with the memory. He asked me not to tell anyone about seeing him there. Said it was important that his work in places like San Miguel remained private. "And yet you're telling us now," Father Thomas observed, his tone careful rather than accusatory. Keanu nodded slowly. "I've been wrestling with that. But something he said that night by the river keeps coming back to me. He told me, sometimes the truth shared with the right people at the right time can multiply good in unexpected ways." Cardinal Vasquez's expression softened. "That does sound like him. A waiter passed by offering champagne. All four declined. The people there didn't know who he was? Sister Elena asked. No, they called him Francisco the Helper. They loved him, not because he was the Pope, but because he sat with them in their pain, celebrated their joys, and worked alongside them without asking for anything in return. Keanu smiled at the memory. There was this grandmother who kept trying to set him up with her daughter. This broke the tension, and even Cardinal Vasquez chuckled. What else did he say to you, if you don't mind sharing? The cardinal asked. Keanu hesitated, then decided to continue. He talked about how leadership from behind a desk or a throne can only teach you so much. He said he needs these times, being unknown, serving directly, to remind himself what the world really needs from him and from the church. As Keanu spoke, he noticed more people gathering nearby, not obviously listening but close enough to overhear. A woman in a blue dress had paused her conversation, her head slightly tilted toward their circle. He told me about other places too. A fishing village in the Philippines after a typhoon, a refugee camp in Uganda, a homeless shelter in Detroit, all places he's gone in secret, just to serve as a regular person. Keanu's voice remained quiet, but the power of the story seemed to expand the circle of listeners. The most amazing thing was how happy he seemed there, despite the difficult conditions. He told me that these trips keep him honest and grounded in reality, away from the politics and ceremony. Sister Elena nodded. That's always been his way, even before. She stopped herself. By now their small gathering had attracted attention. A young photographer hovered nearby, though respectfully keeping his camera down. Two elegantly dressed couples had stopped their conversation entirely and were openly listening. Even a waiter had slowed his pace, tray balanced perfectly as he lingered to hear more. Cardinal Vasquez noticed the growing audience and placed a gentle hand on Keanu's arm. Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private, but the story had already begun to spread. A woman whispered to her companion, who turned to look at Keanu with new interest. A man in a tuxedo was already typing something on his phone, his eyes occasionally darting up to study Keanu's face. Keanu felt a pang of regret. Had he broken the Pope's confidence? The growing ripples of whispers across the gala suggested that keeping this story contained would now be impossible. I shouldn't have, Keanu began. Don't trouble yourself, Cardinal Vasquez said kindly. If this story is beginning its journey into the world now, perhaps that too is happening at the right time. As they moved toward a quieter corner of the gala, Keanu could feel eyes following them. The weight of the Pope's secret felt both heavier and somehow lighter for having been shared. Whatever happened next was beyond his control now. What Keanu couldn't have known was that among the listening ears had been Paolo Rossi, producer of Europe's most watched morning talk show, who was already sending urgent messages to his team. In less than 48 hours, Keanu would find himself sitting under bright studio lights, faced with a decision about whether to share this private story with the entire world. But for now, as the night continued around them, Keanu simply listened as the three Vatican representatives shared their own stories of Francis, a man who, even before becoming Pope, had lived by the principle that true leadership means serving from within, not commanding from above. The bright lights of the Good Morning Europe studio felt warmer than usual, as Keanu Reeves settled into the plush blue guest chair. He had expected to discuss his new film, a thoughtful drama about a man reconnecting with his estranged family, but the energy in the room suggested something else was brewing. Makeup artists had just finished with his face, and the sound technician was clipping a microphone to his simple black button-up shirt when Paolo Rossi, the show's producer, approached with an iPad in hand. Mr. Reeves, wonderful to have you, Paolo said, his Italian accent thick but his English perfect. Just a quick word before we go live. There's been some chatter online about something you mentioned at the Children's Future Gala. Something about Pope Francis? Keanu felt a small knot form in his stomach. Just as he feared, the story had already begun spreading. He had spent a restless night wondering if he had betrayed the Pope's trust by sharing what he'd seen in Colombia. I'm not sure that's something I should discuss further, Keanu said quietly. Paolo nodded respectfully. Of course, completely your choice. Lucia won't ambush you with questions about it. The interview is about your film, as agreed. But as Paolo walked away, Keanu noticed the man's excited whisper to the show's host, Lucia Moretti, a veteran journalist known for her warm but persistent interview style. Her eyebrows raised slightly as she glanced at Keanu with new interest. The floor director counted down. 5, 4, 3. The last numbers came as silent finger signals. Welcome back to Good Morning Europe. Lucia beamed at the camera. Today we're honored to be joined by one of cinema's most beloved and enduring stars, a man whose career spans action blockbusters and intimate dramas alike. Please welcome Keanu Reeves. The studio audience applauded enthusiastically as the camera panned to Keanu, who offered a small wave and smile. Keanu, thank you for being here, Lucia began. Your new film, Echoes of Tomorrow, premieres next week across Europe. It's quite a departure from some of your more action-oriented roles. For the next 15 minutes, they discussed the film, the challenges of portraying a character dealing with regret and redemption, the talented young actors who played his children, the beautiful coastal town in Portugal where they'd filmed much of it. Keanu began to relax. Perhaps the Pope Francis story wouldn't come up after all. He leaned forward, genuinely engaged as he described working with the film's director, a first-time filmmaker with a unique vision. That's what I love about this industry, he said. Finding new voices, new perspectives, people who see the world differently and help us see it too. Lucia nodded appreciatively. Speaking of seeing things differently, your travels take you to some interesting places when you're not filming. I understand you were recently in Rome for a charity gala? And there it was. The subtle shift in topic. Keanu felt a ripple of tension return to his shoulders. Yes, the Children's Future Gala. It's a wonderful organization, building schools in places where education is difficult to access. And before Rome, you were in South America, I believe? Lucia's tone remained casual, but her eyes held Keanu steadily. The studio grew noticeably quieter. Even the camera operators seemed to still their movements. Keanu took a slow breath. He had a choice to make. He could deflect the question, steer the conversation back to his film. Or he could share what he had seen, a story that might inspire millions. Yes, I was in Colombia, he finally said. In a small village called San Miguel del Rio. A tiny smile of satisfaction crossed Lucia's face. I understand something remarkable happened there. Something involving a certain resident of Vatican City? The audience stirred. Phones appeared in hands ready to record whatever came next. Look, Keanu said, leaning forward slightly. What I'm about to share, it's something I've been wrestling with whether to talk about publicly. It involves someone who specifically asked for privacy. But you feel it's important to share? Lucia prompted gently. I think some stories need to be told even if they were meant to stay private because they can change how we see the world. Keanu paused, gathering his thoughts. While I was in this village, I met a man. An older gentleman working at the local medical clinic. He wasn't a doctor, but he was helping with everything. Treating patients, comforting families, even fixing the building itself. The audience was completely silent now, fully engaged. He spoke the local language perfectly, but with a slight accent. He worked tirelessly from sunrise until well after dark. The villagers adored him, called him Francisco the Helper. Keanu smiled at the memory. It took me 3 days to realize who he really was. Lucia's eyes widened slightly. And who was he, Keanu? It was Pope Francis, Keanu said simply. Working anonymously, no security, no entourage. Just a man in worn clothes with a medical bag, serving people who had no idea they were being helped by the head of the Catholic Church. A collective gasp swept through the studio. Someone in the audience whispered, "Oh my God." The cameras, which had been smoothly tracking the conversation, seemed to freeze on Keanu's face. Are you absolutely certain it was him? Lucia asked, her professional composure momentarily slipping to reveal genuine astonishment. Without a doubt, Keanu nodded. When he realized I had recognized him, we spoke privately. He confirmed who he was, but asked me not to tell anyone while he was there. He didn't want the attention, the cameras, the fuss. He just wanted to help people as a fellow human being, not as a religious figure. Lucia seemed momentarily at a loss for words, a rarity for the veteran broadcaster. And he was there. Doing what exactly? Everything, Keanu said, warming to his story now. Feeling somehow that Pope Francis might forgive this breach of confidence for the greater good it might do. He was bandaging wounds, delivering medicine to elderly villagers who couldn't walk to the clinic, playing soccer with the kids. One evening, I saw him sitting with a mother who had just lost her son to illness. He wasn't preaching or offering religious comfort. He was just holding her hand, being present with her grief. The emotion in Keanu's voice was palpable. The studio remained hushed. He told me he's been doing this for years, even before becoming Pope. He slips away from the Vatican occasionally and goes to places in need, disaster areas, conflict zones, forgotten communities, places where people are suffering and need help, not photo opportunities or speeches. And no one recognizes him? Lucia asked, fully invested in the story now. He's careful, grows out his beard a bit, wears simple clothes, travels very light. And honestly, who would expect to see the Pope working in a remote clinic in Colombia or a shelter in Detroit? Keanu smiled slightly. He told me he's been mistaken for a retired teacher, a doctor, even a lost tourist, but never for who he really is. On the studio screens behind them, social media feeds were already exploding with clips of the interview. Pope in disguise and Conch Keanu reveals Pope's secret were trending within minutes. Did he tell you why he does this? Lucia asked, leaning forward in her chair. Keanu nodded slowly. He said something I'll never forget. He said the power and position create walls between people. But true understanding, true service requires standing side by side with no walls at all. He believes that to truly lead the church, he needs to regularly remember what it means to simply be a person helping other people. A woman in the front row of the audience was openly wiping tears from her eyes. A cameraman, breaking professional protocol, reached for a tissue. He also told me about other places, a fishing village in the Philippines after a typhoon hit, a refugee camp in Uganda, a homeless shelter in Detroit in the middle of winter. Keanu paused. These aren't publicity visits. No cameras, no press releases. He spends days or sometimes weeks just being one more set of helping hands. Lucia seemed to remember her role as interviewer. The Vatican has never acknowledged these trips. Do you think they know? A few people must know to cover for his absences, Keanu said. But from what he told me, very few are aware of the full extent of these journeys. What do you think will happen now that you've shared this story? Lucia asked, her tone suggesting she understood the weight of what Keanu had just revealed. I honestly don't know, Keanu admitted. Part of me feels like I've betrayed his confidence. But another part feels like this is a story people need to hear, especially now when we're all so divided, so quick to build walls instead of bridges. He looked directly into the camera, as if he might be speaking directly to Pope Francis himself. If he's watching, I hope he understands why I felt compelled to share this. Some examples of goodness are too important to keep secret. The floor director was frantically signaling to Lucia that they needed to go to commercial, but she held up a hand, unwilling to break this moment. One last question. Keanu, what was it like sitting by that river in Colombia, having this private conversation with Pope Francis? Keanu thought for a moment, his expression softening. It felt like talking with a wise friend who has seen much of life's joy and pain and still chooses hope. Not because he's naive, but because he's seen the alternative and knows that only compassion heals our deepest wounds. He smiled gently. Also, he has a great sense of humor. Made me laugh more than I expected. As the show finally cut to commercial, the studio erupted in conversation. Crew members were on phones, audience members were texting frantically, and Lucia sat back in her chair, knowing she had just been part of a broadcasting moment that would be replayed around the world. What none of them realized yet was how this revelation would ripple outward in the coming hours, touching lives far beyond the studio walls, or how people would react when they realized one of the world's most recognizable religious figures had been anonymously walking among them, not as a leader but as a fellow traveler on the human journey. Within minutes of Keanu Reeves walking off the Good Morning Europe stage, his phone buzzed relentlessly. His publicist, agent, and friends were all trying to reach him at once. He silenced the device and slipped it into his pocket, needing a moment of quiet to process what he had just done. Mr. Reeves? A production assistant appeared at his side. We've set up a private room for you. The network executives thought you might need some space. Keanu nodded gratefully and followed her down a hallway lined with photos of past celebrity guests. The small room had a comfortable couch, a table with water and coffee, and a television showing various news channels. Every screen was displaying his face, clips from the interview playing on repeat. Thank you, he said simply. As the door closed behind the assistant, Keanu sank onto the couch and finally looked at his phone. Over 300 notifications in just 20 minutes. He scrolled through them, catching glimpses of messages. "What have you done?" From his publicist. Vatican officials requesting immediate contact. From his agent. "My brother is a priest in Brazil. What you said about Pope Francis is exactly what he suspected for years." From a friend. Keanu took a deep breath and turned his attention to the television. A news anchor was speaking rapidly, her expression animated. Breaking news that has taken social media by storm. Actor Keanu Reeves has claimed that Pope Francis regularly travels incognito to serve in disaster areas and impoverished communities worldwide. The Vatican has not yet issued an official response, but sources close to the Holy See indicate there is significant activity behind those ancient walls this morning. He switched to another channel, where a panel of religious experts was already debating the plausibility of his story. "Logistically, it seems impossible," a stern-looking woman in a business suit was saying. "The Pope's schedule is meticulously planned and public. Security concerns alone would prevent such trips. And yet," countered an older man with a gentle voice, "there are those unexplained gaps in his calendar, the times when the Vatican simply says he is resting or in prayer. We've all wondered." Keanu turned off the television. The weight of what he'd revealed settled more heavily on his shoulders. Had he done the right thing? Pope Francis had trusted him with this secret, and he had shared it with the world. Yet something told him this truth needed to be known, that it might help heal some of the divisions in a world that desperately needed examples of genuine service and humility. His phone rang again. This time he answered, Keanu Reeves speaking. "Mr. Reeves." The voice was measured, dignified with an Italian accent. "This is Cardinal Vasquez. We spoke at the gala in Rome." "Yes, Cardinal. I remember." Keanu closed his eyes, bracing for reproach. Things have accelerated rather quickly, haven't they? The Cardinal's tone was impossible to read. "I'm sorry if I've created problems," Keanu said honestly. "I've been struggling with whether to share what I saw since that night in Colombia." There was a pause, then a soft chuckle from the Cardinal. "The Holy Father has a saying, 'God works through our mistakes as much as through our virtues.' Perhaps this is such a case." Is he angry with me?" Keanu asked, feeling oddly like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. "Angry? No, surprised certainly, but Pope Francis understands the power of witness better than most." Another pause. "He would like to speak with you." Keanu sat up straight. "The Pope wants to talk to me? Now, if possible. He is in a meeting with his advisors discussing how to respond to this revelation, but he asked me to arrange a video call with you within the hour." "Of course," Keanu agreed immediately. "Whatever works best for him." After arranging the details, Keanu hung up and stared at the wall, processing this unexpected turn. Pope Francis wanted to speak with him directly. What would he say? Would he deny everything? Ask Keanu to retract his story? Or would he confirm it? 40 minutes later, a secure video call was connected. After a brief wait, the screen flickered and there he was. Pope Francis sitting at a simple desk wearing his white papal garments. His expression was thoughtful but not angry. "Mr. Reeves," he began, his accented English warm and clear. "It seems we have much to discuss." "Your Holiness," Keanu replied, feeling strangely nervous. "I want to apologize for—" The Pope raised a hand, gently interrupting. "Before you continue, I want to thank you." "Thank me?" Keanu blinked in surprise. "For seeing me, truly seeing me, in that village. Not as a symbol or a title, but as a fellow human trying to do some small good in this world." Pope Francis leaned closer to the camera. "Many look at me but see only the robes, the position. You saw the person." "I betrayed your confidence," Keanu said quietly. "You asked me not to tell anyone." The Pope smiled slightly. "Yes, that is true. And yet—" He looked off camera briefly, seeming to gather his thoughts. "For years I have lived this double life. The public pope who must navigate politics and protocol, and the private servant who craves the simplicity of direct human connection. Perhaps it was time for these two worlds to meet." Outside the door of Keanu's private room, he could hear increased activity, voices, footsteps, the sounds of a news organization trying to keep up with a rapidly evolving story. "What will happen now?" Keanu asked. Pope Francis sighed. the weight of his position momentarily visible in the slight slump of his shoulders. My advisors are divided. Some wish me to deny everything, to call your story a misunderstanding or fabrication. Others believe we should simply decline to comment and let the story fade away. And what do you think? Keanu asked. I think... The Pope paused, a twinkle appearing in his eyes. I think that sometimes God uses unexpected messengers to deliver important truths. Perhaps you are such a messenger, Mr. Reeves. Before Keanu could respond, there was a commotion on the Pope's end of the call. Someone off camera was speaking rapidly in Italian. Francis listened, nodded, and turned back to Keanu. It seems the story has grown wings. Photos have appeared online. A bearded man in Colombia who looks remarkably like me working at a clinic. And now reports are coming in from other places, the Philippines, Uganda, Detroit. People connecting the dots, remembering the kind stranger who helped them. Keanu felt a rush of relief. The truth was confirming itself. There is no putting this genie back in the bottle, Francis continued. So I must decide. Do I continue to hide this part of my ministry, or do I acknowledge it and use this moment to remind people what it truly means to serve one another? The question hung in the air between them, spanning continents and bridging the gap between a spiritual leader and an actor who had accidentally exposed his secret. Whatever you decide, Keanu said carefully, I'll support it. If you want me to walk back my comments somehow, I will. Pope Francis shook his head. No, truth has its own timetable for revealing itself. This was always going to come to light someday. He smiled, though I admit I didn't expect it to be through a Hollywood star. A knock came at Keanu's door. The production assistant's voice called through. Mr. Reeves, the network president would like to speak with you. And there are representatives from major news outlets requesting interviews. One moment, Keanu called back before turning to the screen again. It seems we both have decisions to make about what happens next. Pope Francis nodded. Indeed, but perhaps not decisions we make alone. Would you be open to working with me on how we tell this story going forward? There is power in this truth, but how we share it matters greatly. Of course, Keanu agreed without hesitation. Whatever you think is best. Then let us both pray for wisdom, the Pope said. And prepare for what comes next. He leaned forward slightly. Tomorrow morning I will address this during my weekly audience. I would be honored if you would be present, not to speak, but simply to be there. In Vatican City? Keanu asked, surprised. Yes. A car will be waiting for you at Rome's airport if you can arrange to be on tonight's flight from Paris. The Pope's eyes crinkled with a gentle smile. I believe we have started something important together, Mr. Reeves. Now we must see it through. After the call ended, Keanu sat in silence for a long moment. Then he opened the door to find not just the production assistant but an entire crowd of people waiting. Producers, executives, reporters who had somehow gained access to the building. Mr. Reeves, can you confirm the Pope has contacted you? Is the Vatican denying your story? Was it really Pope Francis in Colombia? The questions came rapid fire from all directions. Keanu raised his hands gently, asking for quiet. When the noise subsided, he spoke simply. I've just spoken with Pope Francis, he said, his calm voice cutting through the tension in the hallway. He has asked me to come to Rome. Tomorrow morning he will address what I shared during his weekly audience. The corridor erupted again with questions and exclamations. Phones appeared everywhere, recording his every word and expression. That's all I can share right now, Keanu continued, except to say that sometimes the most powerful truths are the ones hidden in plain sight, the simple acts of service happening all around us that we fail to notice or value. As he made his way through the crowd toward the exit, messages continued to pour into his phone from around the world. Religious leaders of various faiths were commenting on the story. Humanitarian organizations were issuing statements. Regular people were sharing their own experiences of unexpected kindness from strangers. A simple truth revealed by chance was rippling outward, touching lives far beyond what Keanu could have imagined when he first recognized that familiar face in a small Colombian village. Whatever happened next, he knew the world needed this story. The story of a leader who understood that true power comes not from a throne or title, but from kneeling to help those in need. His driver was waiting at the studio's back entrance. Airport, sir? The man asked, already informed of the sudden change in plans. Yes, Keanu nodded. To Rome. The journey to Rome felt surreal. Keanu had barely managed to pack a small bag before being whisked to the airport, where a private jet, arranged by whom he wasn't entirely sure, waited to carry him across Europe. As the plane cut through wisps of cloud over the Mediterranean, he gazed out the window, still processing the whirlwind of events. His phone, when he checked it during the flight, showed that the story had exploded globally. Pope Francis in disguise was trending in over 60 countries. News outlets were interrupting regular programming to discuss the implications. Religious commentators, politicians, celebrities, and everyday people were all weighing in. What struck Keanu most as he scrolled through social media was the overwhelming emotional response. People weren't just surprised, they were deeply moved. Comments poured in from around the world. "I'm not even religious, but this made me cry. This is what true leadership looks like." If this is true, Pope Francis is living the values he preaches in a way few leaders ever have. The aircraft began its descent into Rome. It was nearly midnight, but the lights of the eternal city twinkled below like earthbound stars. Keanu felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. Tomorrow morning, he would sit in Vatican City while Pope Francis addressed the world about his secret missions of mercy. As promised, a black car with discreet Vatican insignia waited on the tarmac. The driver, a middle-aged Italian man with kind eyes, greeted him with a respectful nod. "Mr. Reeves, welcome to Rome. I am to take you to your accommodations for the night." Instead of a hotel, the car pulled up to a modest guest house within Vatican City's walls, a place normally reserved for visiting clergy and dignitaries. Cardinal Vasquez was waiting in the simple lobby, looking tired but welcoming. "Mr. Reeves, thank you for coming so quickly." He extended his hand. "These are unusual circumstances, to say the least. How is he?" Keanu asked, referring to the Pope. The cardinal's expression softened. "Calm. Remarkably so, given the global storm you two have created together." There was no reproach in his tone, only a hint of wonder. "He spent much of the evening in prayer, then worked on what he will say tomorrow." He glanced at his watch. "Or rather today. It is past midnight now." After showing Keanu to a simple but comfortable room, the cardinal paused at the door. "The Holy Father asked me to tell you something." He said, "Tell Mr. Reeves that God's work often happens in unexpected ways through unexpected people. We are both instruments in something larger than ourselves." With those cryptic words hanging in the air, Keanu was left alone. Despite his exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. When dawn broke, he stood at his window watching the sun rise over St. Peter's Basilica, its golden light spilling across the ancient stones. A soft knock at his door announced a young priest who had come to escort him to breakfast, then to the audience hall. As they walked through the Vatican's hallowed corridors, Keanu noticed the unusually heightened activity: security personnel speaking urgently into earpieces, officials hurrying with documents, journalists being corralled into designated areas. "Is it always this busy?" he asked his guide. The young priest shook his head. "No, today is different. The audience hall reached capacity 2 hours ago. The square outside is filling up as well." He glanced at Keanu. "People want to hear what the Holy Father will say about your revelation." At a small side door to the audience hall, Keanu was met by Vatican security, who led him through a private entrance. He could hear the murmur of thousands of voices on the other side of the wall. The massive hall was completely full, a sea of faces from every background imaginable, all waiting with palpable anticipation. He was shown to a seat in the front row, next to visiting dignitaries and church officials. The energy in the room was electric, a mixture of excitement, curiosity, and something deeper. Phones were out everywhere, despite the usual request to limit photography. This was a moment no one wanted to miss. A hush fell over the crowd as a side door opened and Pope Francis entered. Instead of being carried in on the traditional papal chair, as was sometimes done for larger gatherings, he walked in on his own, humble and upright, wearing his simple white robes. His face was composed, but his eyes immediately found Keanu's, and he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The Pope took his place at the center of the stage and surveyed the crowd. For a long moment he said nothing, letting the silence build. When he finally spoke, his voice was clear and strong, carrying to the farthest corners of the hall without seeming forced. "Good morning," he began simply in Italian, before switching to English, an unusual choice that signaled the global importance of what he was about to say. Today I speak not just to those gathered here, but to people of all faiths and backgrounds around the world. The crowd was utterly silent, hanging on every word. Yesterday, through the voice of a thoughtful actor, he gestured toward Keanu, causing a ripple of whispers. A private aspect of my ministry was revealed to the world, an aspect that until now I had chosen to keep hidden. Phones rose higher as people recorded the historic admission. For many years, before and after becoming Pope, I have periodically traveled to places of suffering and need. Not as a religious leader with cameras and security, but as a simple man with 2 hands ready to work and a heart ready to listen. His voice grew softer, more personal. In Colombia, the Philippines, Uganda, the United States, and other places, I have gone where I felt called to serve directly, without title or recognition. A woman in the second row began to weep softly. Others joined her, moved by the Pope's words and the authenticity with which he spoke them. Some might ask why I kept these journeys secret. The answer is simple. True service requires humility. When people know you are the Pope, they treat you differently. They put on their best face, hide their real struggles, or seek to impress you. Francis smiled gently. But when they think you are just Francisco the helper, or Joseph the volunteer, or any of the other names I have used, they show you their true selves. They allow you to serve them as one human being to another, without the walls that titles and positions create. The crowd stirred, murmuring in appreciation of his honesty. I did not plan for this truth to come to light, Francis continued, his gaze returning to Keanu. And I admit, when I first learned it had been revealed, I felt exposed. A small, self-deprecating smile crossed his face. Even popes have their moments of human discomfort. This drew a gentle laugh from the audience, breaking some of the tension. But then I remembered something important, something I have said many times but perhaps needed to hear myself. The truth will set you free. He spread his hands wide. And I do feel a certain freedom today, standing before you not just as Pope Francis, but as a man who has known the joy of serving without recognition or reward. The hall was utterly still, thousands of people barely breathing as they absorbed his words. In recent years, we have seen too many leaders who separate themselves from those they serve, who build walls instead of bridges, who speak of sacrifice but know only privilege. The Pope's voice grew stronger, more passionate. Today I challenge leaders of all kinds, political, religious, business, community, to step out from behind your titles and positions. Work directly, anonymously, humbly among those you serve. Listen to their stories. Share their burdens. Know their reality. Many in the audience were nodding, some wiping away tears. To the wonderful people I have met on these journeys, those who welcomed a stranger into their communities without knowing who he was, I say thank you. You have taught me more about faith, resilience, and human dignity than any theological text ever could. Francis paused, looking directly at Keanu once more. And to Mr. Keanu Reeves, whose conscience led him to share what he witnessed, I also say thank you. Sometimes God works through unexpected messengers. The Pope then did something completely unexpected. He stepped away from his prepared position and walked over to where Keanu sat. The security detail tensed but did not intervene. Francis extended his hand to Keanu, who rose and took it. What happened next stunned the audience into complete silence. The Pope embraced Keanu warmly, a simple human gesture that transcended their different worlds. Then he whispered something in Keanu's ear that the microphones didn't catch, words meant only for him. When they separated, both men had tears in their eyes. The hall remained frozen in awe for a heartbeat, then erupted in thunderous applause and cheers. People stood, many weeping openly. Some reached for strangers' hands, overcome by the moment. Outside in St. Peter's Square, where tens of thousands more watched on giant screens, the reaction was even more profound. People of different faiths, nationalities, and backgrounds embraced one another. A group of Muslim visitors stood arm in arm with Catholic nuns. Jewish tourists wiped away tears alongside Buddhist monks. The barriers that typically divided humanity seemed temporarily forgotten in the wake of this simple truth. Authentic service transcends all boundaries. Inside the hall, as the applause continued for several minutes, Keanu looked out at the sea of moved faces. He thought about the unlikely journey that had brought him here, From a chance encounter in a Colombian village to this historic moment that was already changing how people viewed leadership, service, and each other, the Pope returned to his place and raised his hands gently, asking for quiet. When the hall finally settled, he spoke once more, his voice soft but carrying clearly through the silence. Today marks not an end, but a beginning. Let this revelation inspire not just admiration but action. Let us all find ways to serve one another without seeking recognition or reward. He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Perhaps in the spirit of transparency, I should tell you all where I plan to go next. The audience laughed, then held their breath, waiting to hear where the Pope's next anonymous mission might take him. But Francis just smiled mysteriously. Some secrets I think I will still keep. But know this, wherever there is suffering, wherever there is need, any one of us might be there working side by side with you. And that includes your Pope. As the formal audience concluded and people began to file out, many staying to discuss what they had witnessed, no one noticed the elderly janitor quietly sweeping in the corner, listening to their conversations with a gentle smile on his face. Some secrets indeed were worth keeping. 3 months had passed since that extraordinary morning in Vatican City. Keanu Reeves sat on the porch of a small cabin overlooking Lake Tahoe, reading through the latest batch of letters that had somehow found their way to him despite his efforts to take a quiet break from the public eye. Each envelope contained a story, sometimes accompanied by photos of people who had been inspired to change their lives after learning about Pope Francis's secret missions of service. The stack of mail grew weekly, forwarded from his agent with a note that simply said, "Thought you'd want to see these." Keanu sipped his coffee and opened another letter. This one came from a business executive in Singapore who had resigned from his high-paying corporate job to start a mobile medical clinic, serving remote villages in Indonesia. I realized I had spent 20 years climbing a ladder that was leaning against the wrong wall, the man wrote. Thank you for showing me another way to measure success. The sun sparkled on the lake's surface as Keanu reflected on how much had changed since that chance encounter in Colombia. The world had initially treated the story as a fascinating revelation about one religious leader, but it had quickly grown into something much more, a global conversation about authentic service, leadership, and human connection. His phone rang, displaying a number he now recognized. With a small smile, he answered, "Good morning, Cardinal." "Good morning, Mr. Reeves." Cardinal Vasquez's voice was warm. "I trust you're finding some peace in your retreat?" "I am, thank you." Keanu gazed out at the pine trees surrounding his temporary home. "Though I seem to be receiving a lot of mail for someone who's supposed to be taking a break from the world." The Cardinal chuckled. "The story you helped tell continues to ripple outward. That's actually why I'm calling. His Holiness would like to know if you're available for a video call tomorrow. There's something he wishes to discuss with you." Keanu felt a familiar flutter of curiosity. In the months since the revelation, he and Pope Francis had spoken several times, brief, warm conversations that felt more like check-ins between friends than formal communications between a pontiff and an actor. Of course, any time that works for him. After arranging the details, Keanu returned to the letters, reading story after story of transformed lives. A retired teacher who now spent weekends at a homeless shelter. A college student who organized fellow students to rebuild homes in flood-damaged neighborhoods. A wealthy tech entrepreneur who had started working anonymously at a soup kitchen every Tuesday night. The next morning, Keanu sat at his small desk as the video call connected. Pope Francis appeared on screen, looking energetic despite the late hour in Rome. Behind him was not his usual formal office, but what appeared to be a simple room with a wooden cross on the wall. "My friend," Francis greeted him with genuine warmth. "How are you finding your time of reflection?" "Peaceful, thank you," Keanu smiled. "Though I keep receiving these letters." "Ah yes, the letters." The Pope nodded knowingly. "I receive thousands myself now. People sharing how they've been inspired to serve others without recognition or reward." His eyes crinkled with pleasure. "It seems our little revelation has sparked something beautiful." They spoke easily for a few minutes, catching up like old friends. Then the Pope's expression grew more thoughtful. "The reason I wanted to speak with you, Keanu, is that I have a proposal." He leaned closer to the camera. "In 3 weeks, the Vatican will host a global conference on authentic service in leadership. Religious leaders from all faiths, political figures, business executives, community organizers, people from all walks of life coming together to discuss how to serve others with genuine humility. Sounds important, Keanu said, sensing there was more. I would like you to be there not just as an attendee, but as a key speaker. The Pope held up a hand before Keanu could respond. Before you answer, let me explain why. You were not merely a messenger in this story. You made a difficult moral choice to share a truth you felt the world needed, even knowing it might create complications. That kind of discernment, that moral courage, is exactly what this conference aims to explore. Keanu was silent for a moment. Public speaking had never been his favorite activity, and addressing a gathering of world leaders at the Vatican seemed far outside his usual role. I'm not sure what wisdom I could offer such an audience, he said honestly. Pope Francis smiled gently. Sometimes the most powerful thing is not wisdom but witness, simply sharing truthfully what you have seen and experienced. And you, my friend, have witnessed something few others have. After their call ended, Keanu walked down to the lake's edge, skipping stones across the calm surface as he considered the invitation. As an actor, he was used to playing roles, speaking words written by others. This would be different. This would be his own voice, his own story. 3 weeks later, Keanu stood at the podium in a grand hall within Vatican City. Before him sat an extraordinary gathering. Religious leaders in various traditional garments, politicians, CEOs, activists, and community organizers from around the world. Pope Francis sat in the front row, not on an elevated throne but in a simple chair alongside everyone else. Keanu took a deep breath and began to speak. I'm not a religious leader or a politician. I'm not an expert on service or leadership, he said simply. I'm just someone who happened to recognize a man doing good work when no one was watching. The room was utterly silent as Keanu recounted the story they all now knew. His time in Colombia, recognizing Pope Francis working anonymously, their conversation by the river, and his eventual decision to share what he had witnessed. What struck me most, he continued, his voice growing more confident, wasn't just that the Pope was serving others in secret. It was the joy I saw in him while doing so. In that village clinic, with no robes, no title, no power beyond his 2 hands and caring heart, he seemed the most alive, the most himself. Heads nodded throughout the audience. I think we all wear masks of some kind, roles and titles that both define us and confine us. What I learned from Pope Francis is that sometimes we need to set those masks aside to do our most meaningful work. As Keanu concluded his brief address, the audience rose in a standing ovation. But what happened next wasn't on the official program. Pope Francis walked to the stage and gestured to someone in the wings. A group of people began to enter, ordinary-looking men and women of different ages and backgrounds. Taking the microphone, Francis introduced them one by one: a nurse from the Philippines, a teacher from Uganda, a soup kitchen volunteer from Detroit, and a clinic worker from Colombia. What they all had in common was that each had worked side by side with Pope Francis during his anonymous missions, never knowing who he really was until the story broke worldwide. The Colombian man, an older gentleman with weathered hands and kind eyes, stepped forward. For 3 weeks he worked alongside me fixing the clinic roof in the heat of the day. I thought he was just a helpful visitor named Francisco. When I saw him on television, he shook his head in disbelief, still processing the revelation. The leader of the Catholic Church was passing me roof tiles and sharing his lunch with me. One by one, they shared their stories, not grand narratives of miraculous interventions, but simple tales of a man who listened well, worked hard, and treated everyone with the same quiet respect. The audience sat transfixed, many wiping away tears as the genuine impact of Francis's secret ministry was given human faces and voices. When they finished speaking, Pope Francis embraced each of them warmly. Then he returned to the microphone. "These are my true teachers," he said simply, gesturing to the group. "From them, I have learned more about God's love than from any theology book. This is why I continue to go out, not as Pope but as a fellow human, to places where I can serve and learn." He turned to face the audience directly. The conference title mentions leadership, but perhaps we should be talking instead about fellowship. The art of walking alongside others without placing ourselves above them. As the day's formal proceedings concluded, something remarkable happened. Attendees began exchanging contact information, making commitments, forming unexpected alliances across religious and political divides. The Dalai Lama chatted animatedly with an evangelical pastor. A conservative American senator and a progressive European parliamentarian discovered shared passion for prison reform. A Muslim imam and a Jewish rabbi planned a joint youth service project. In a quiet moment during the reception that followed, Keanu found himself standing beside Pope Francis near a window overlooking St. Peter's Square. "Look at them," Francis said softly, nodding toward the animated groups of leaders deep in conversation. Yesterday many were divided by doctrine, policy, or old wounds. Today they speak as friends united by a common purpose. "It's remarkable," Keanu agreed. "This is just the beginning," Francis continued. "Next month, the first of our new servant leadership centers will open. Places where people of all backgrounds can learn practical skills for community service, then apply them anonymously in areas of need." "And will you still go out on your secret missions?" Keanu asked with a small smile. The Pope's eyes twinkled. "Some traditions are worth continuing, even when they're no longer completely secret. Though I may need a better disguise now." He chuckled softly. "Perhaps you could give me acting lessons." 6 months later, Keanu stood in the middle of a half-built community center in New Orleans. He wiped sweat from his brow and took a water break alongside the other volunteers, none of whom had recognized him under the baseball cap and behind the 3-day stubble he'd grown. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was a photo from Cardinal Vasquez, Pope Francis in a simple brown jacket and worker's cap, helping rebuild homes in a typhoon-damaged village in the Philippines. The message read, "He says to tell you he's getting better at this disguise business." Keanu smiled and put his phone away, picking up his hammer to return to work. Around the world, thousands of others were doing the same, serving quietly, without recognition, inspired by a story that had begun with a chance encounter in a Colombian village. Some worked in community gardens, others in literacy programs, medical clinics, or food banks. Many were ordinary people who had never considered themselves leaders. Some were powerful figures who had stepped away from their titles to rediscover the simple joy of direct service. And somewhere among them, whether in a Detroit shelter, a Roman neighborhood, or a village clinic, you might find an elderly man with gentle eyes and a ready smile, known only as Francisco the Helper, passing out soup, listening to stories, or fixing a leaky roof. If you looked closely, you might recognize him, but he would simply put a finger to his lips, smile warmly, and hand you a tool so you could work alongside him. After all, the most important work is rarely done from thrones or podiums, but side by side, hand in hand, heart to heart.